Mr Speaker, I ask leave of the House to make a ministerial statement relating to the 15th anniversary of the National Apology to Australia's Indigenous peoples and the Closing the Gap implementation plan.
Is leave granted? The leave is granted. I call the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and I recommit on behalf of the government that I lead to the implementation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full, and I particularly welcome members of the Stolen Generation who are joining us here this morning, having been at the breakfast anniversary in the Great Hall earlier on. Mr Speaker, the traditional owners of Broome, the Yaru, know this time of year as Mangala. It's one of 6 seasons they divide the year into, a time of heavy rain and strong winds. In Kakadu, another land of 6 seasons, the Bininj and Mungoi know it as Gujal, the true wet season. That will in turn give way in a couple of months to Bungarang, the season of knock-em-down winds, which will come flatten the speargrass. To the Noongar around Perth, it is the second summer of Uluru, while to the Wiradjuri in Melbourne, it is Euk, the season of eels. Across this continent, in the tropics, on the coast, on the islands and in the deep desert, in the Mallee and the Bush valleys, it is mapped out in a shifting mosaic of human knowledge. Major seasons and a supporting cast of minor seasons, all in tune with the specific language of the land and the sky. Language is built over millennia and spelled out in flowers and fire, in the shifting of the wind or the vanishing of the rain, in the behaviour of animals and the movement of the stars. More than 60,000 years of wisdom from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is all around us, if we care to listen. We reflect on wisdom today. We reflect on generosity and on the power of opening our ears and, yes, opening our hearts. As we mark the 15th anniversary of the apology to the stolen generations today, we consider how it guides us as we seek solutions for the challenges of the present and find ways to shape a better future. Delivering the apology took conviction, decency and humanity. It took courage to hear it. On this day, 15 years ago, members of the stolen generations came to this parliament, which for so long had cast its shadow as the pinnacle of a system that had failed them. Historically, governments of all persuasions have failed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Yet those members of the stolen generations came here with such grace. So much had been taken from them, but their hearts had so much to give. I say to them, your courage showed us that when we're brave enough to acknowledge failure, we can find the strength to take the next step forward together. The apology was the first act on the first parliamentary sitting day of the Rudd Labor government. As Leader of the House on that day, it was certainly my proudest moment in this chamber. And from Prime Minister Rudd, we heard the words that reverberated across Australia. I am sorry on behalf of our nation. Contrary to the doomsayers, it was a positive moment for the nation, a moment of unity, a moment on the road to healing and unburdening. And for everyone who had put themselves through the ordeal of reliving their childhood. And I thank those men and women who spoke to me this morning about their experience. This was confirmation that their voices had at last been heard. Like Prime Minister Keating before him, Prime Minister Rudd understood that until a nation acknowledges the full truth of its history, it remains burdened by its unspoken weight. In acknowledging the past, Prime Minister Rudd said we were, to quote him, laying claim to a future that embraces all Australians. All Australians. Truth can be hard for those speaking it, for those listening, but it is what ultimately lets us move forward as one. As Mick Dodson said about the process that culminated in the apology, I know of no Indigenous person who told their story to the inquiry who wanted non-Indigenous Australians to feel guilty. They just wanted people to know the truth. And to know the truth, we had to open ourselves to those voices. It's easy to say the apology didn't fix everything. That's true, it didn't. But what single thing can? What moment can? There is no step that can on its own get us to our destination. But we keep taking steps and we keep walking. One of the apology's great achievements was to keep alive the faith in decency and the hope for reconciliation that illuminate the Uluru Statement from the Heart. The apology could never be the end of the story, but the close of a chapter and the beginning of a better one. Not everyone supported the apology 15 years ago, though some have since expressed their regret. There is a long way to go. Just how far is spelled out each year in the Closing the Gap report. As of next year, the report will be issued when it was intended, in conjunction with the apology anniversary. But as we saw when the government tabled the last report just a few months ago, the gaps not only persist, some are getting bigger. The report lays out forensically one lopsided statistic after another in health, education, incarceration rates, and especially damning, life expectancy. These aren't gaps, they're chasms. It is clear that not enough support has been directed towards organisations to deliver for communities. It is clear that we have leapt too swiftly from a climate of forceful intervention to simply telling communities, you're on your own. We're seeing this in Alice Springs and in so many communities beyond. I went to Alice to listen, to hear from people on the ground. I wanted to hear from the women whose voices have so often not been heard. Last week, this government and the Northern Territory government announced a landmark package for Central Australia to improve community safety, tackle alcohol-related harm, and provide more opportunities, particularly for young people. To address the past decade's decline in investment and services, we will invest in a plan for improved community safety and cohesion, job creation, investing in families, improving school attendance and completion through caring for culture and country, and preventing and addressing the issues caused by fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. These decisions are based upon listening to the community. What is called for is nothing less than a renewed national commitment to genuine partnership between governments and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The distinction between well-intentioned government action for Indigenous communities and action with Indigenous communities is a real one. As Tom Calma put it recently, policies are too often made for First Nations people rather than with us. Today, as an important step in that renewal, I present our implementation plan in conjunction with the implementation plan from the Coalition of Peaks. It is a concrete demonstration of how we will advance real-world solutions that improve the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. As well as reaffirming closing the gap as a top priority for my government, our plan reflects our unwavering commitment to working in partnership with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It is about action, action that gives purpose and direction to our efforts to transform government and enables the full participation and self-determination of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our national life. This plan also accelerates specific actions on the national agreements for priority reforms to transform the relationship between governments and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, communities and organisations. The implementation plan sets out a plan for improving essential services in discrete communities and households outside town boundaries. New measures in the 2023 implementation plan include the following: $150 million over 4 years for the National Water Grid Fund to support First Nations water infrastructure and provide safe and reliable water for remote and regional Indigenous communities. $117 million Commonwealth contribution to a new one-year partnership with the Northern Territory Government to accelerate the building of new remote housing. $11.8 million over 2 years for the National Strategy for Food Security in remote First Nations communities. Continued funding of $68.6 million over 2 years for family violence and prevention legal service providers. $21.9 million over 5 years for up to 7 place-based, trauma-aware and culturally responsive healing programs for those impacted by family violence or at risk of engagement with child protection systems. $38.4 million over 4 years to boost on-country education for remote First Nations students. This includes greater access to junior ranges and more choice for families of culturally appropriate distance learning. $21.6 million to support quality boarding for rural and remote students for an additional year. These measures will be designed and delivered in partnership with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. While we will have more to say in the budget in May, I would like to express my gratitude to Pat Turner and the Coalition of Peaks in working together with us to develop and deliver tangible, practical and specific actions. It will be a long time before we can say we've done enough, but we have to do this work together, day after day, week after week. On the 26th of May, it will be 6 years since the Uluru Statement from the Heart was delivered after the First Nations National Constitutional Convention. There has been no haste, no shortcuts. This is the culmination of years of discussion, consultation and hard work by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, as well as others, including people in this place. And what shines through most brightly is the desire to bring us all closer together as a people reconciled and our great nation made greater. The Voice won't be a funding body. It won't run programs. It won't have a power of veto. It will be about recognition of the continent's first people in the nation's birth certificate, and it will be about consultation. And because of it, governments will make better decisions, coordinated and without duplication, leading to better outcomes. Recognition is the what. The voice is the how. This isn't about politics. This isn't about politicians. This is about people. People striving to make themselves heard across our great nation, in the regions and beyond, in the remotest corners of our vast continent. It is not a radical change, but it is a change for the better. For all of us, I am optimistic about the success of the referendum because I am optimistic that Australians will support this embrace of truth, justice, decency and respect. When I think of the 1967 referendum and the apology, two great steps forward that we have taken together as a nation, I look to friends and colleagues who embody those moments. I look to my dear friend, Minister Burney, who was a young child when it was decided her people were worth counting as Australians. A vote where Australians were offered the choice to right a wrong, and they seized it. And I look to Senator Patrick Dodson. As a boy in Katherine, he hid in the long grass when the welfare officers and the police came to take his mates away. Think about that. What a terrifying moment for a child. What a formative moment in a life. He's seen some of our nation's story play out before his eyes. And yet, Senator Dodson looks back over our modern history and reminds me that amid the wrongs, there was also such kindness. And that is the spirit of generosity that he brings to his task as the Special Envoy for Reconciliation and Implementation of the Uluru Statement. A very big-hearted Australian spirit. In 1967, 90% of Australians voted to remove a harmful, discriminatory relic. In 2023, our generation can go one better. Instead of removing a provision that no longer speaks for who we are, we can make a positive change that speaks for the future that we seek to build together. This can be a moment of national unity, an extraordinary opportunity for every Australian to be counted and to be heard, to own this change and be proud of it, and truly live the spirit of the fair go. We are a nation of goodwill and good heart. I believe there's no challenge that is beyond us. Many Aboriginal people across the country celebrate the rising of the morning star, its light ushering in a new phase of life for the oncoming generation. It is a transformative time of song and celebration, marking joy in the ongoing survival of their peoples. The people of Australia, through the invitation embodied in the Uluru Statement, have been asked to travel on this journey. We have a chance to add a bright new season to the calendar and a future that embraces all of us.
I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition, to speak and
Present a copy of my ministerial statement, the Commonwealth Closing the Gap Implementation Plan 2023 and the Coalition of Peaks Closing the Gap Implementation Plan 2023.
And I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition, to speak in response to the Prime Minister's statement.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to start by thanking the Prime Minister for his words and acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. There is a very special group of people in the gallery today, and we acknowledge those who are present in the gallery who are part of the stolen generation, and thank them for being here for this 15th anniversary. Mr Speaker, nations have complex histories defined by achievements, histories marked by blemishes, and our country is no exception. A mature nation, though, doesn't cherry-pick from its past, it doesn't rewrite or cancel parts of our history out. Rather, a mature nation is one which speaks truthfully and in totality about its history. One which embraces both the light and dark chapters of its national narrative. Australians have every right to be proud of so much that was accomplished by our forebears. They helped build the modern nation in which we are so lucky to live today. But we also acknowledge that our forebears committed serious wrongs. The wrongs committed against the stolen generations were acknowledged by Prime Minister Rudd when he delivered the national apology in this place in 2008. He offered that heartfelt apology without qualification on behalf of the government and the Parliament of Australia for the actions of successive governments under successive parliaments. For the laws and policies between 1910 and 1970, which saw thousands of children forcibly taken from their families. And for the hurt, the humiliation, the pain, the grief, the suffering, the loss and indignity inflicted upon the stolen generations, their families left behind and their descendants. The national apology was a profound moment for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who had been affected, for Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians alike, for our nation. Mr Speaker, 15 years have passed since the apology, and this is an occasion for delicate reflection. The national apology was about Australians acknowledging the sins of the past, the cold, confronting, uncomfortable truth, as Prime Minister Rudd put it. And in that acknowledgement, accepting the flaws and failings inherent in our historical character with the maturity of a modern nation. A modern nation which sees its history in the round, successes and failures alike. As Prime Minister Rudd said, and I quote, "Peoples must become fully reconciled to their past if they're to go forward with confidence to embrace their future." Mr Speaker, with the release of the government's 2023 Closing the Gap implementation plan today, we welcome several initiatives. In particular, more than $68 million over 2 years for support to women and children experiencing family, domestic and sexual violence, and more than $21 million over 5 years to support families impacted by family violence. I also want to acknowledge the Morrison government, which worked with governments at all levels and the Coalition of Peaks to formulate a national agreement with priority areas of reform. The Morrison government also released the first Closing the Gap Commonwealth implementation plan in 2021. The plan committed more than $1 billion towards new measures to address some of the most pressing issues facing Indigenous Australians. That funding included, among other things, a $378 million redress scheme for stolen generation survivors in the Australian Capital Territory, Northern Territory and Jervis Bay Territory, $75 million for country boarding schools, $26 million for a city-country partnership program to improve school outcomes, and $66 million for alcohol and drug treatment services. In his historic speech, Prime Minister Rudd said, "Symbolism is important, but unless the great symbolism of reconciliation is accompanied by an even greater substance, it is little more than a clanging gong." It's not sentiment that makes history, it's our actions that make history. For decades, Coalition and Labor governments alike have been on a unity ticket to improve the lives of Indigenous Australians. Whilst we welcome what improvements have been made, the conditions today in Alice Springs, as pointed out by the Prime Minister, demonstrate that the situation is, in reality, and certainly by many indicators, worse for Indigenous kids and their parents than it was 15 years ago. We've also heard of issues in Arakoon in Queensland and Kimberley in Western Australia, Ceduna in South Australia. Collectively, we have failed to close the gap. And despite the good intentions and the deeds of so many, despite the many billions of dollars which have been invested, we've seen more and more bureaucracy for bigger and more centralised in its nature, and it's not led to better decisions. Too often, a capital city view has informed decisions, drowning out a regional and remote community view. Indigenous Australians are yearning to see action which truly makes a practical difference. For every Australian wants to see improved life outcomes for Indigenous Australians. On this 15th anniversary of the national apology, as we reflect on past mistakes, let us reflect on our present actions. I fear we are failing again this very day, for which a future apology will be necessary. Ironically, the situation in Alice Springs has highlighted children suffering in a harmful situation which is suffocating their chances of breaking a vicious cycle. Authorities have decided to put culture and other considerations above the best interests of those children in leaving them in harm's way. And surely and understandably, the 10-year-old Indigenous child suffering abuse in Alice Springs will in 10 years' time ask how. How in 2023 did you knowingly and consciously tolerate a situation where my interests were not put first? It's our actions which make history, as Prime Minister Rudd put it. Then it's time to think carefully about our actions, because our current actions, for all their good intent, are not bringing about enough practical outcomes for which we can all be proud as a nation. We will never, as a nation, create another stolen generation, but our actions can prevent a new generation from having their lives and aspirations stolen. If we are to make better decisions which lead to better actions, then I ask of the government, bring Australians with you, trust them with the detail, appeal to their reason, don't fear and inform citizenry. And if you truly want to further the cause of reconciliation, please bring them on the journey. Mr Speaker, I want to speak directly to those in the gallery today and further afield who are part of the stolen generation and those who are descendants or are connected to the issue. And I want to say in an unscripted way, I apologise for my actions, and the Prime Minister's frequently able to point it out that I didn't attend the chamber for the apology 15 years ago. I've apologised for that in the past, and I repeat that apology again today. In 2008, I'd been out of the Queensland Police Force for about 9 years, and I was still, and probably truthfully to this day, live with those images of turning up to domestic violence incidences where Indigenous women and children had suffered physical abuse, certainly mental abuse. I remember clearly attending Palm Island, where I brought back the body of an Indigenous woman in a body bag who had been thrust off a cliff to her death. And I remember thinking at the time that those incidences were still occurring on a daily basis in 2008. And the judgment that I formed was that if we were to make an apology, it needed to be at a time when we had addressed and we had curbed that violence and those incidences. I failed to grasp at the time the symbolic significance to the stolen generation of the apology. It was right for Prime Minister Rudd to make the apology in 2008. It's right that we recognise the anniversary today. It's right that the government continues its efforts, and in whatever way possible, we support that bipartisan effort. Every Australian wants to see a better outcome for Indigenous Australians. There's nobody I speak to around the country, regardless of their view on the Voice, that doesn't want to see an improved situation in Alice Springs or in Ceduna or anywhere else in the country. People who have a different view about how we might get to that end point, how we might help people along the path, aren't hard-hearted because they have a different view to us or a different approach to how that practical assistance might be provided. And I hope that the government can bear that in mind in the current debate. So, Mr Speaker, I'm honoured as the Leader of the Liberal Party of the opposition to be here today to commemorate the 15-year anniversary. I commend Prime Minister Rudd for the action he took in 2008, and I know that as a country we are determined to make sure that we can address particularly those issues of domestic violence, to make sure that we can reduce those gaps that have widened in relation to infant mortality, to life expectancy, to other indicators around education and health that must improve so that we can improve the lives and the future of every Indigenous Australian.
And I give the call to the Leader of the House.
Speaker, I move that the House take note of the Prime Minister's statement on the 15th anniversary of the National Apology to Australia's Indigenous peoples and the Closing the Gap implementation plan.
The question is the House take note of the document, and I give the call to the Honourable Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. One sweet day, all the children came back where the hearts grow strong. back where they all belong. The children came back. Back where they understand, back to their mother's land. The children came back. The late, great Archie Roach's first perform took the children away more than 33 years ago. Archie spoke of the truth that for many years was denied by governments and denied by parliaments. Children were removed from their families because of the colour of their skin, and it was governments that did it. Most Australians didn't know of this reality. For decades there was a stubborn silence, while many of those removed suffered a private pain of unbearable loss. It was and is one of the darkest chapters in our history. In 1991, the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody found that of the 99 deaths investigated, 43 were people who had been separated from their families. By 1997, the Bringing Them Home report, which took evidence from hundreds of people from across the country, made 54 recommendations. The report found that 1 in 10 and 1 in 3 Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families between 1910 and 1970 in most of our lifetimes. One of its key recommendations was for an apology to be given by governments. Western Australia was the first state to issue an apology on the 27th of May 1997, closely followed by New South Wales in June of the same year. And by 2001, all states and territories had issued apologies. The only holdout was the Australian government under the then Prime Minister, John Howard. Recently, I went back and looked at some of the accounts in the Bringing Them Home report. So many tales of heartbreak, of lives changed forever. One harrowing story was from Paul. Paul's mother was tricked into putting him into a home while she recovered from a serious illness. He was made a ward of the state, and his mother's consent was never sought. His adoptive family rejected him after 7 months, and Paul was placed in an orphanage and later with an abusive foster family. In his submission, Paul said, "My mother never gave up trying to locate me. She wrote many letters to the state welfare authorities, pleading with them to give her son back. Birthday and Christmas cards were sent care of the welfare department. All of these letters were shelved. The state welfare department treated my mother like dirt, with utter contempt, as if she never existed." The apology delivered by Prime Minister Rudd was at its core about healing deep wounds, closing a painful chapter of denial of our history, and opening a new chapter of our collective story, a better chapter. It was about people, real people, the people joining us today. Thank you so much. Hearing from the Prime Minister of Australia, a simple word, sorry, an apology, the truth, and you deserve that. You deserve nothing less. For some, the apology was something to reject. And of course, we all learn and we all grow. I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his apology today. It is a good thing that we grow and we learn. But now we have the chance to do something practical together to improve the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians, something that will have an impact on the ground and in communities. by getting behind the Closing the Gap implementation plan and by supporting, as the Prime Minister so beautifully said, constitutional recognition through a voice. To do otherwise risks repeating the mistakes of the past. So I say, don't hold us back. Let's move forward for everyone. 18 years have passed since Tom Calma, our Senior Australian of the Year, delivered his social justice report, urging governments to commit to achieving equality for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in health, in life expectancy within 25 years. 16 years since governments pledged to close key gaps in life expectancy, to halve the gap in mortality rates for children, and halve the gap in reading, writing and numeracy achievements within a decade. In 2020, governments partnered with the Coalition of Peaks to expand these targets, which now include land, languages and justice outcomes. Despite this, report after report, year after year, as the Prime Minister has said, progress has been slow, too slow. The Albanese government's commitment to closing the gap is unequivocal. Our commitment to working in partnership with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians through the Coalition of Peace with Pat Turner, and one day an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. The Albanese government's first Closing the Gap implementation plan details the next steps the Commonwealth will take towards achieving the targets and priority reforms of the National Agreement on Closing the Gap. It includes more than $400 million of additional spending that the Prime Minister outlined. But can I focus on one of those things? Because it is a whole of government plan that brings together in one place all of the actions that each department and agency is taking to achieve closing the gap. I want to focus on the first announcement that the Prime Minister has made, $150 million over 4 years to support First Nations water infrastructure and provide safe and reliable water for remote and regional communities. It is a disgrace that in 2023 in Australia, there are First Nation communities that do not have reliable access to safe drinking water. An absolute disgrace. It is almost impossible for some people to imagine what it is like to live your whole life in a place where the water is not safe, where dialysis machines can't work because the water isn't clean enough. And we all know of the enormous problem of renal failure in our communities. And I want to thank the Minister for the Environment and Water for her commitment on this. Thank you. This is on top, of course, of the $250 million the Prime Minister announced as part of our plan for a better, safer future for Central Australia, where I, again with the member for Lingiari and others, visited over the weekend. We want to better coordinate the state and territories with our community-controlled organisation partners. This is about getting things done, and importantly, for people to hold us to account. Governments are better when they listen and when they are held to account. Holding governments to account was not done in the era of the stolen generations. One wonders if there'd been a voice at the time. Nor was anyone listening. Today in 2023, a new generation has a chance to do things differently, to create a better future. It's up to a new generation of Australians to help close the gap. We are a great country, and we can be even greater if we get the next steps right. by making a lasting difference through practical action, one that gives Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians a voice. Let us seize this moment and take Australia forward for everyone.
The question is the House take note of the document and give the call to the Honourable Member Barara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I begin by acknowledging this nation's Indigenous people and their 65,000 years of endurance, resilience and wisdom. I recognise the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people on whose lands we gather, and I pay respect to members of the stolen generation who are with us and bring their own stories, experiences and pain to this gathering. You are the living witness to the policies that failed, and you inspire us with your indomitable spirit. And I pay tribute to my Indigenous member and Senator colleagues and the Minister for Indigenous Australians, who, like a predecessor in that role, I call a friend. This chamber is not only a meeting place, it's a place of memory, of shared national memory. And we're right to remember. We remember almost a century ago, the first time the Parliament met in this city, in a building like a small white wedding cake set amongst the fields of grass and dust. At that first gathering of the Parliament at Canberra, thousands were invited. Thousands and thousands, but not a single Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person. Not one. So two Indigenous men, Jimmy Clements and John Noble, took it on themselves to walk to Canberra and let their presence be known. Officialdom tried to turn them away, but the crowd demanded that they stay, and they did. Fair-minded Australians have always been on the side of the person having a go. And we remember the actions of that great Yorta Yorta man, William Cooper, an organiser, petitioner and agitator for change, who spoke up not only for his own people, but for others as well. In 1938, he protested the absence of Indigenous members from the Parliament, and in December the same year, after the events of Kristallnacht, he led one of the few protests to the German consulate decrying the persecution of Jewish people by the Nazis in Germany. We remember the Bark Petition, the 1967 referendum, the arrival of Neville Bonner in the Senate and Ken Wyatt in the House of Representatives, and so many more since. And on this day we remember the apology. An apology for children taken away from parents, families, community and culture. An apology for the brothers and sisters separated. An apology for the forced relocations away from country. An apology, to use the words from Neville Bonner's maiden speech, to those who were shot, poisoned, hanged and broken in spirit until they became refugees in their own land. An apology for the pain that cascades through the generations. An apology that needs to be repeated again and again, wherever and whenever Aboriginal Australians are denied the same opportunities as their fellow citizens. Mr Speaker, on days like this, for those of us without a lived experience of dispossession or loss, it's easy to speak of the past and linger there. To linger there because it is easier than confronting the present, to confront the work that we must still do. Kevin Rudd was right when he said it's not sentiment that makes history, it's our actions that make history. And that demands that we speak of the present, and to speak of the present in terms of a shared accountability. Last Thursday, the Prime Minister said something to me across the dispatch box, and his words have stayed with me all weekend. He said simply, "The member is a participant and not an observer." A participant and not an observer. Across too many areas in government, in the bureaucracy, in the Parliament and in the media, we've all become observers. Our fears have frozen us. Fears about complexity, a misunderstanding the interrelationship of difficult and different issues. Fears of making bad situations worse. Fears about unintended offence and of culturally misreading moments. Fears of the stigma we create by highlighting failures. These are the fears we don't talk about, but that most of us share. They make us observers, not participants. Senator Price and the member for Lingiari raised the alarm about Alice Springs in their first speech 8 months ago. From both sides of the aisle, two Indigenous parliamentarians, participants who've not been afraid to speak the truth about alcohol, the truth about violence, and the truth about our continued failure as Australians. I pay tribute to their courage. I know it wasn't easy. I say to the Prime Minister, we all have to stop being observers, all of us. Yes, it's right to remember the past. Yes, it's right to want to change the future, but our place is here in the present, And that's where all of us are failing. I've seen the interim report into Closing the Gap, and I thank the Minister's Office for their briefing. On a day when we remember the failed policies of the past, I want to talk about the failed policies of the present. I want to talk about the people living in the towns and the regional areas across Australia and the intertwining of alcohol, violence and community failure. These are not easy topics to talk about. Last week, the report by Darrell Anderson, the Northern Territory Controller into Alice Springs, was released. It makes for confronting reading, and I want to read you a few lines that cut me to my core. She said, "The children who've been spoken to have unanimously voiced their hatred of alcohol and the harm it inflicts on their families. Their simple aspirations are to live life in a normal place, have jobs when they're older and be able to support their families with basic needs." Let me say it again. The children voiced their hatred of alcohol and the harm it inflicts on their families. Such powerful and simple words. The children are speaking truth to us. And the sad truth is it's not only in Alice Springs. And I want to speak about a few other places where we must hear the local voices. The member for Leichhardt has told me about failures in places such as Arakoon in his electorate, where school attendance has dwindled and where the local paper says that despite the presence of 50 police officers, residents are reluctant to leave their homes, and those who do often have to arm themselves. The member for Grey has told me about the issues being faced in Port Augusta and in Ceduna. In Port Augusta, there's a large transient population. There's unrest and fear, and shopkeepers are concerned about businesses and personal safety. In Ceduna, where I went on my visit with Senator Little just after I became the Shadow Minister, where the cashless debit card provided a measure of relief, now residents are fearful about the damage being done by alcohol and fearful of speaking up publicly. Fearful there might be consequences because they want to restrict the grog. The member for O'Connor has spoken to me about Laverton and Leonora. In Laverton, local Indigenous leaders are begging for tougher alcohol restrictions. He's told me about Sarah Sullivan, an Indigenous resident who's spoken publicly about Laverton being a great town when she grew up, but her children were experiencing something terribly different these days. Children and adults chased for money and smokes. Local voices matter, and they're just not being heard. The member for Durack has written to the Prime Minister about the Kimberley, the Pilbara and Carnarvon. The member for Durack has met with a collection of Pilbara organisations that includes the Pilbara Aboriginal Health Alliance, Youth Involvement Council, the Yinhawangka Aboriginal Corporation, the Pantakurma Aboriginal Medical Service and the Robe River Kurrama Aboriginal Corporation. They share a deep concern about youth crime and the destructive trail it's leaving. The federal government invests millions in diversionary programs, and we must urgently determine if our investment is fit for purpose and whether those investments are being delivered as intended. The member for Durack says isolation is a way of life for many in Durack, but now fearful residents are further isolated, bound within their own homes, too scared to leave. Today, on this anniversary, we must honour the past by answering the failures of this generation towards Indigenous children. The present in so many regional and remote communities is terrible. I'm not blaming the Prime Minister or the Minister or the state and territory governments. This is a collective failure, and I put my hand up too and share the blame with everyone. Despite the progress in other areas, some of which are reported in today's interim Closing the Gap report, this is an Australian failure. It's a shared Australian failure. In all too many places, alcohol is fueling the most unspeakable crimes against women and children, and this cannot be allowed to continue. That's why I support the Leader of the Opposition's call for a Royal Commission into the abuse of Indigenous children. In many cases, these are the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the stolen generations. The member for Maribyrnong was right to call for a Royal Commission into aged care, a Royal Commission that Prime Minister Morrison agreed to. The Prime Minister, when opposition leader, was right to call for a Royal Commission into veteran suicide. Again, Prime Minister Morrison agreed to it. The Leader of the Opposition is right to call for a Royal Commission into the abuse of Indigenous children, and the Prime Minister should agree to it as well. Royal Commissions are never comfortable, I understand that. But frankly, they are a whole lot better than facing regional failure after regional failure and simply continuing with more of the same. The Prime Minister and Minister have spoken passionately about the voice. I share their passion. But it's in our national interest to heed the voices of Indigenous Australians that are speaking now. We must pay attention to the voices that do not already have a platform in Australian public life. And we must heed the calls of children whose simple yearning is for a normal life, the sort of life we'd hope for any of our own children. If we're to break the cycle, we cannot afford to ignore these voices any longer. So let us use this 15th anniversary of the national apology to recommit ourselves to action. Action in partnership with Indigenous communities, with a coalition of peaks, with state and territory and local governments and all Australians of goodwill. Let us all choose to be participants and not observers in the repair of our country and the reconciliation of our nation.